It was supposed to be just another Sunday dinner, but nothing about that evening felt ordinary. Not the heavy silence in the air. Not the sideways glances from my cousins. Not even the way my mother had paused mid-sip of her wine when I walked in with Ethan. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us what would you do in this situation. Be honest. Tell me in the comments below. We read every comment. Let's begin. The dining room of the Harper estate was glowing under a crystal chandelier. The long mahogany table filled with roast beef, baked potatoes, heirloom china, and polished silverware that probably hadn't seen a speck of real love in decades. I barely made it past the entryway before the first comment hit. Wow, she showed up. Aunt Linda muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, fork still in her mouth. Guess even the help gets time off. My stomach nodded, but I smiled because I was used to this. They always looked at me like I didn't belong, as if I was an unwanted smudge on the family portrait they desperately wanted to keep spotless. My husband, Ethan Whitmore, gently squeezed my hand. He knew. He always knew. His eyes flickered toward me, full of warmth beneath his quiet strength. In his charcoal suit and tailored navy coat, he looked like every inch the quiet billionaire nobody realized he was not yet. We hadn't told them about who he really was, what we really owned, not because we were hiding, but because I wanted to face them as me, not as the woman married to a man they'd gravel to if they knew his last name. We sat near the end of the table, far from the seat my father always reserved for his real children. It was my younger half-sister Natalie who got the seat next to him. Perfect Natalie, with her Ivy League resume and designer smile. She looked at me with that glossy pity she wore like lipstick. "Oh," she said, tilting her head. "You wore that dress." Ethan leaned in and whispered, "You look incredible, Willow." I smiled, but I was already bracing. Then it came. The blow I somehow never expected, though maybe I should have. My father set down his wine glass, wiped his lips slowly with a linen napkin, and looked straight at me. His tone cut the air like a cold blade. "You don't belong at this table." The room went dead quiet. He didn't blink. "You're not my real daughter." I couldn't breathe. He wasn't done. "You mean nothing to me." A few of my relatives gasped, but none of them stood. A few looked away. One or two bit their lips to stop smiling. My uncle chuckled. Natalie smirked, eyes sparkling. And I sat frozen. My skin burned. My hands trembled in my lap. But Ethan stood up slowly, powerfully, calm fury written across his face. He pushed back his chair and looked at my father, then at every single person at that table. "I didn't want to do this here," he said, his voice low, clear, and commanding. "But since you've decided to humiliate my wife, my family in front of everyone," he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thin black folder. My father scoffed. "What? Are you going to show us her grocery list?" Ethan's jaw tensed. "No, just the documentation from the Whitmore Trust." Aunt Linda's fork dropped. He continued, "The same trust that owns 51% of Harper and Knox Holdings. The same one that funded your last bailout and the same trust that effective this morning froze your personal assets for breaching an ethics clause." My father stood. "What the hell are you talking about?" Ethan tossed the folder onto the table and the pages fanned out filled with bank stamps, signatures, and power of attorney statements. My dad's face drained of color. "You think she's nothing?" Ethan asked, his voice growing sharper. "That woman you dismissed, she's the reason you're not already bankrupt. She's the woman I love. And the only reason any of you are still sitting here smugly sipping wine is because she let you." The silence that followed wasn't just awkward. It was shattering. My mother's hand shook as she reached for her wine. My sister's jaw fell open. My uncle looked like he'd seen a ghost. And I just sat there blinking, heart racing, soul trembling. Ethan turned to me and gently took my hand. "You ready to go home, Willow?" I nodded, still too stunned to speak. As we walked out, past the table, past the chandelier, past the house where I once begged for their love. I didn't cry. Not this time, because this time they weren't laughing. This time they were begging me to look back. The car ride home was dead quiet until it wasn't. I sat in the passenger seat of Ethan's matte black Range Rover, my fingers twitching slightly in my lap. The low hum of the engine did nothing to silence the chaos in my head. But when I looked at him, his hand gripping the wheel, jaw clenched, gaze fixed straight ahead, I saw it. The same storm I was swallowing. I didn't expect it to go that far. I whispered, my voice thin. Ethan didn't answer immediately. Then with a sharp exhale, he said, I was ready. Were you? He finally looked at me at a red light, his eyes piercing through the dark interior like fire through ice. Willow, you've let them mock you long enough. You've spent years carrying their shame like it's yours. But it ends now. I swallowed hard. I wanted to believe that. God, I did. But it wasn't that simple. Growing up, my father, Stephen Harper, had always made me feel like a placeholder. Not quite a daughter, more like a duty he begrudgingly tolerated because of a fling he had with my mother before she passed when I was 7. After she died, he remarried in just under a year. Then came Natalie, his true heir as he always called her. The one who had his name, his blood, his pride. I had the last name, but never the seat. I turned to the window, blinking back the rising sting behind my eyes. I just didn't expect him to say it out loud. Not in front of everyone. Not like that. You expected too much from a man who's never treated you like you mattered. That one hit, Ethan parked the car in front of our brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. Under the street lamp, the red brick exterior looked warm and safe. I'd forgotten how much I needed that. He turned off the engine and placed a hand over mine. Let's stop reacting to them, Willow. Let's make them react to you for once. I turned to face him, breath hitching. You already did enough tonight. You haven't even seen what I'm about to do. The next morning, the bomb dropped. Front page. Forbes. The Wall Street Journal. New York Business Weekly. Billionaire Ethan Whitmore acquires controlling interest in Harper and Knox Holdings. Names wife as new chair of the board. The headline hit them harder than any slap ever could. By 10 a.m., I had 63 missed calls. 12 from my father, 24 from Natalie, several from Harper and Knox executives, the rest from distant relatives who suddenly remembered they had my number. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I stood in front of the mirror in our bedroom, wearing the navy blue power suit Ethan had tailored for me months ago, back when I said I'd never be able to face those people as anything but just Willow. You look like a storm in silk, he said from behind, adjusting his cufflinks. I met his eyes in the reflection. Do you think I'm ready for this? He smiled slightly. I think they're not. When I entered the Harper and Knox headquarters later that day, the receptionist stood up like I was royalty. I was no longer the forgotten daughter, no longer the side piece to their perfect portrait. I was the woman who now owned the table they once kicked her from. Ms. Whitmore, the executive assistant, stammered, standing quickly. Your father's in the boardroom. They're all waiting. Of course they were. I entered with Ethan 2 steps behind me. Not because he had to be, but because he wanted me to lead. When I stepped into that marble-walled boardroom, a dozen men and women in suits stared up from their leather chairs. But it was my father, pale, jaw tight, who stood. You can't just waltz in here like this, he snapped. This is still my company. Incorrect, Ethan said coolly. It was. I pulled out a folder of my own. Copies of the acquisition paperwork, ethics clause violations, and every suppressed scandal that had been buried under my father's watch. And I let it hit the table with a thud. Stephen Harper, I said, voice clear, steady, and cutting. You're officially relieved of all executive duties. Effective immediately, the room gasped. He laughed bitterly. Who the hell do you think you are? I stepped forward slow and deliberate until I stood inches from his face. I'm the daughter you said meant nothing, I whispered. But I became the woman who now decides if he'll even have a desk left in this building. He didn't speak. Couldn't. No one did. Not until I turned to the room. You laughed at me, all of you. You watched him humiliate me for years. You said nothing, and now you'll answer to me. Not because I want revenge, but because I want a company with integrity, and that starts by removing rot. The silence cracked as Ethan placed a gentle hand on my back. Support, power, love. It was everything my father never gave me. But now I had it in a man who didn't just stand beside me. He helped me stand taller. You'd think removing your father from power would feel victorious. Like standing on a mountaintop, Wind in your hair, soaking in applause, but it didn't. It felt like cutting off your own arm just to stop the poison from spreading. After that boardroom meeting, I locked myself in my office, the one with glass walls and a skyline view, and stared down at the city. "Willow," Ethan said softly from the doorway. "You did it." I didn't answer right away. He walked in, closed the door behind him, and crossed the room with those calm, steady steps I always relied on. "Talk to me. I don't know if I'm proud or shattered." He knelt in front of my chair, took both of my hands, and kissed my knuckles. "You feel both because you're human." "I wanted them to respect me," I whispered. "Not fear me, not hate me. They never respected you. They used you, discarded you, mocked you. But now they don't get to ignore you anymore." I looked into his eyes. My husband, my protector, my anchor, and the only person who never once treated me like I had to prove I deserved love. And it hit me, this wasn't just revenge. This was reclamation. "Then I need to lead differently," I said slowly. "I need to make this place better. Not just for me, but for everyone like me who's ever been made to feel invisible." Ethan nodded. "Then start tomorrow." But fate had other plans. Because as I stepped out of the elevator later that evening to head home, Natalie was waiting in the lobby, dressed in black, crying. I stopped. "What are you doing here?" She walked straight toward me, ignoring the security guard who tried to intercept. "Willow, please." I didn't know. I didn't know he wasn't your real father." I froze. "What?" She wiped her tears with trembling fingers. "Dad, he told me yesterday after you left dinner. He told me your mom had an affair. That you were never his." The floor felt like it tilted. I barely heard Ethan calling my name from behind me. "He said he stayed quiet because of shame." She continued, her voice cracking. "He said you were a constant reminder. And when he saw you walking in here with everything he built, he snapped." It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was abandonment built on a lie. The ground beneath everything I believed cracked wide open. Ethan stepped forward, wrapping his arm around me. "Willow, we'll find out the truth." And I knew he meant it because 24 hours later, we had it. The DNA test confirmed what I hadn't wanted to believe. Stephen Harper was not my biological father. But there was another name, a man listed on the birth certificate filed under seal in a hospital in Connecticut. A name my mother had erased from every document before she died. Michael Langford, founder of Langford Biotech. Net worth $122.4 billion. And apparently my real father. The next 2 weeks felt like living someone else's life, because instead of confronting a man who rejected me, I was being contacted by a man who had never known I existed. His letter arrived in a black envelope, handwritten, gentle, curious. I have no excuses, only a desperate hope that I get to know the daughter I never had a chance to love. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't, but Natalie kept texting me. Apologizing, crying, telling me she never truly knew what it felt like to lose something until she realized I never had it to begin with. And then one night, I found an old VHS in a dusty box in our brownstone basement labeled in shaky handwriting for Willow from Mom. Ethan hooked up the old player. We sat on the floor, watched the screen flicker, and there she was, my mother, laughing, crying, talking to the camera. "If you're seeing this, it means you're old enough now. Old enough to know the truth. Michael Langford loved me once. But your birth would have ruined him then. I chose to protect you instead of burden him. But I want you to know something. You were never unwanted. You were never a mistake. You were my miracle. Willow." I broke. I sobbed into Ethan's chest. Not because I was hurt, but because for the first time in years, I felt whole. 3 days later, I stood outside a sprawling glass mansion on the cliffs of Newport, Rhode Island. Ethan held my hand. The door opened, and a man in his late 60s stepped out. Silver hair, warm brown eyes that looked just like mine, hands trembling. He didn't say anything. He just opened his arms. And for the first time in my life, I ran toward a father who actually wanted me. Michael Langford didn't try to explain away the years. He didn't make promises. He didn't cry big dramatic tears. He just looked at me like he'd been holding his breath for decades and could finally exhale. We sat on the patio facing the ocean, wrapped in fleece blankets. The breeze was cold, but my heart felt strangely warm. He poured me tea with shaking hands. You remind me of her, your mother. I never stopped wondering what happened to her after she left. She protected me, I said quietly. From everything, he nodded. She always had more courage than I did. We talked for hours about her, about what he did with his life, about what I'd done with mine. He didn't flinch when I told him about Stephen or the things he said or the way he treated me. He listened. Really listened. And that somehow meant more than any apology. At one point, I pulled out a photo from my coat pocket. My favorite picture of Mom holding me as a baby. He stared at it for a long time. You are the greatest gift I never got to open. I didn't realize I was crying until Ethan's hand found mine and gave it a soft squeeze. Back in New York, things moved fast. The media caught on to the Langford connection. Headlines went wild. Harper's scandal grows. Daughter not his, inherits controlling interest. Anyway, Langford's secret daughter, now one of the most powerful women in NYC. My father didn't dare reach out, but others did. Board members who once looked through me now scrambled to schedule meetings. One of them even sent flowers with a card that read, "We always knew there was something special in you." Funny how silence turns into flattery when wealth enters the picture. I ignored everyone. Instead, I focused on using my new role for something better. Ethan and I launched a foundation in my mother's name, the Diana Grace Initiative, focused on helping women escape toxic family systems and find their voice. For once, I was building something that wasn't about proving myself. It was about freeing myself. But not everyone was happy. Natalie showed up at the office one morning. No appointment, just her and a worn-out look I'd never seen on her before. I'm not here to beg, she said, standing in front of my desk. I'm just here to say I'm sorry. I stared at her waiting. I didn't know what it was like, she said, eyes red. To be the outsider. I grew up thinking you were just bitter, but now I realize how cruel we all were. I let her speak. I didn't interrupt, but I didn't hug her either. Apologies don't undo years, I said calmly. But maybe they're a start. She nodded. I hope so. As she turned to leave, she paused in the doorway. For what it's worth, Dad's lost everything now. He's drinking again. He keeps saying your name like a curse. I looked up, then maybe that's his punishment. And just like that, she was gone. I sat back in my chair, staring out the window. This city had never made space for girls like me. But I had carved out my own seat at the table, and now I had no interest in ever giving it back. It was a gray Saturday morning when I returned to the Harper estate alone. No cameras, no press, no Ethan, just me. I hadn't planned to ever step foot in that house again. But something inside me needed closure. Not for them, for me. The same house where I was once told I didn't belong now looked strangely small. I walked through the front door without knocking. No one stopped me. In the living room, I found Stephen Harper, my once father, sitting alone in a wrinkled shirt, staring at a half-empty glass of bourbon. He looked up slowly, bloodshot eyes, ashtray full, curtains drawn. What do you want? He rasped. I stayed standing. Nothing. I just wanted you to see what silence builds. He let out a dry laugh. You think you won? You think all this money and power makes you better than me? No, I said softly. What makes me better is that I never used my pain to hurt other people. What makes me better is that I survived you. He looked down at the floor like a man who suddenly saw the bottom of a cliff he'd stepped off years ago. I turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. By the way, I said, voice calm. Mom never cheated on you. You knew I wasn't your daughter, and you married her anyway. You just hated me because I reminded you of the truth you buried. He didn't deny it. I didn't need him to. Later that evening, I sat on the rooftop garden of our brownstone with Ethan beside me, watching the skyline shimmer under the night. I thought going back would break me, I whispered. But it didn't, he smiled. That's because you're not the same woman who stood in that dining room weeks ago. No, I said, turning to face him. I'm stronger now. He took my hand and freer. We stayed there quiet for a while until I finally asked, did you ever think we'd come this far? Ethan laughed. I knew from the moment you told me your story. I saw the fire they tried to smother. I knew you were going to change everything. And I did. I wasn't a mistake. I wasn't weak. I wasn't their shame. I was my mother's daughter, my husband's equal, and my own damn legacy. Let them remember what they said that night. Let them remember how they laughed.